This video is sponsored by the Cascade Clash, a competitively focused Warhammer 40k event being held this March in the Pacific Northwest. More about them later on in the video. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and we are back with another installment of the best armies in Warhammer 40k. This is the weekly video series where we go through all of the events from the past weekend and talk about undefeated lists. This time we're talking about the weekend of January 27th and 28th, 2024, and let's dive right into it with a metagame breakdown. Now, this is probably going to be the last hurrah for this current competitive season of Warhammer 40k, because we are excitedly waiting for a new data slate update to rebalance the game and potentially change the composition of a lot of these lists. So this might be the last one that we see with these current mechanics. Although we were kind of expecting it last week, we didn't get it, so all the events this weekend are using the current data slate rules. While last week we saw a little bit of a shakeup, with Las Vegas Open taking a lot of the spotlight and actually really changing the composition of undefeated lists that we saw, so that we saw a lot of lesser played lists do pretty well in smaller side events that went on over the weekend. This week, we're kind of back to business as usual, with Chaos Space Marines at the very top with 3 undefeated results, 2 of which from the Winchester GT with absolutely identical lists. They both won all their games, and they were playing the same army. It's pretty boring at this point, honestly. Astra Militarum kind of coming out of nowhere with 2 undefeated results as well at Dark Sphere January and the Oxford Onslaught 3. And Space Marines themselves are back to it with some good results. 2 undefeated results for Black Templars and 1 for the Ultramarine subfaction. Black Templars at Battle for the Bend and the Bolton-Wa, and the Bolton-Wa also being dominated by Space Marines, just like the Winchester GT was dominated by Chaos Space Marines, with Ultramarines as the other undefeated list from that. Aeldari bringing up the middle here with a win from the Schwarzwald GT, Necrons taking down the Fun and Games GT, Orks at the Manufactorum GT, Death Guard at the Dark Sphere January GT, and Leagues of Votann at the Las Vegas GT. Lots of interesting results this week, a pretty wide spread of factions, despite the fact that I think the aftershocks of the year's biggest event at LVO has done a little bit to compress the number of GTs that we saw go down this week. And now, sponsor time. With the new year and the new competitive Warhammer 40k season comes a deluge of competitive events. A veritable waterfall of them. One could even call it a cascade. And one of the best of them is the Cascade Clash. Cascade Clash is a new competitively focused tabletop gaming convention held March 8th through 10th in Mount Vernon, Washington, and is presented by Aegis Games. While the event holds a variety of competitive gaming tournaments, we're here to talk about Warhammer. The highlight of the Cascade Clash is a 3-day, 8-round, 150-player Warhammer 40k major. The event is being organized by an experienced judge team drawn from successful competitive Warhammer 40k players. And they formulated a packet specifically to alleviate many of the pain points experienced by other large events in the field. And they're also offering a frankly ludicrous amount of prize support. This includes prizes for best painting and best overall, best sportsman, best in faction, and even best in record. The event is being held on the Skagit County Fairgrounds with pretty reasonable travel distance from both SeaTac and Bellingham Airport, and includes a shuttle service from SeaTac if you're flying in. So there's many options to travel to the event. So follow the links down in the pinned comment and video description for more information about the Cascade Clash and the Warhammer 40k major being held there. Don't forget to mark your calendars March 8th through 10th and get ready for the Clash. So let's dive into the lists, and we'll talk about Chaos Space Marines, I guess, very quickly. Here's one of the lists from the Winchester GT. I don't know, they were the same. While these bear a lot of similarities to other Chaos Space Marine lists that we've talked about in the past, this one is a little bit focused on more aggressive infantry. It has a big backline of shooting from the 3 Forge Fiends, and takes 3 units of 5 Slaaneshi Warp Talons instead of the normal Bricks of Chosen that we've been seeing from Chaos Space Marines more recently. That gives the list a lot of threat range, especially since those can advance and charge with the Slaanesh stratagem, and it brings lots and lots of support units in the form of 4 units of Durglings and the Blue Scribes out of Chaos Demons. It's led by Abaddon the Despoiler, a character that we haven't seen for a little while, but who can empower the rest of the army by generating command points for the bevy of super powerful stratagems that Chaos Space Marines have access to. At least this one's not entirely dominated by Chaos Chosen, I guess. Moving on, let's talk about Astra Militarum. This list is Nassim Fouchain's list from the Dark Spear January GT, one of the 2 lists to go undefeated at that event. The list was led by Lord Solar Leontis, a platoon command squad with a mortar to attach into a unit of Death Corps of Krieg, complete with the combo of Ursula Creed to grant that mortar fields of fire, allowing it to improve the armor penetration characteristics of units attacking the target of that indirect fire weapon. We then have 2 tank commanders, both of them with Demolisher battle cannons, 1 unit of Kadathan jungle fighters in the battle line, 2 Bulgrin squads. These are actually full Bulgrin squads, 6 models apiece, equipped with brute shields, 3 Khazarkan squads to add some additional scouting infantry alongside those jungle fighters, 3 Manticores to bring up the rear with some insane indirect fire, and 2 scout sentinels to support them by allowing them to ignore the indirect fire penalty. This list can fill the mid-board of the table with a lot of those scouting infantry alongside the Bulgrin squads, has absolutely insane artillery from the backline, and good mid-board shooting from the 2 tank commanders as well. Overall, just a good example of a very solid Astra Militarum list that's able to survive a lot of matchups thanks to the inclusion of those 12 big burly Bulgrin. Moving on from that to Black Templars. We actually saw 2 very different Black Templars lists go undefeated this week, and I think we'll actually talk about both of them. The first one is Simeon Pollard from the Bolton Wa. This was an Ironstorm Spearhead, the vehicle-focused detachment, and this one was focusing on Crusader squads, using the floating rerolls from the detachment to get the maximum use out of the many heavy weapons that multiple small Crusader squads are able to mount. The list was led by Marshal Helbrecht, as well as a Tech Marine with Master of the Machine War to allow units to advance or fall back and shoot. We then had 4 Crusader squads kitted out with Meltas, multi-Meltas on the Heavy Weapon Marine, Meltiguns on the Special Weapon Marine, and Inferno pistols on the Sword Brother, 2 Inceptor squads with Plasma Exterminators to act as utility, 2 Scout squads to back them up, and a unit of 5 Primaris Sword Brethren to attach into High Marshal Helbrecht. We then had no less than 3 Gladiator Reapers to add some anti-infantry shooting to back up those Meltas, 3 Predator Destructors to add very efficient anti-tank shooting, 2 Rhinos to keep those Crusader squads in, and a Black Templars Impulsor for Helbrecht and his Sword Brethren buddies. We've seen a lot of different builds coming out of Ironstorm Spearhead, especially focusing on those Crusader squads and oftentimes taking Land Raiders to deliver more melee-oriented units. This one is a little bit of a happy medium between the 2. We have some classic battle tanks, we have some APCs filled with infantry, and we've got a little bit of a smattering of melee counterpunch as well. Moving on to Benjamin Fredrickson's army from Battle for the Bend GT. This was a classic Gladius task force list led by an Apothecary Biologus with the Fire Discipline combo, a standard captain with the Honor Vehement to buff up his melee attacks, an Artificer Armor captain, as well as High Marshal Helbrecht. 3 Black Templars Impulsors carried 3 units of 5 Primaris Sword Brethren alongside a big 6-model Aggressor squad to attach that Apothecary Biologus into, a 3-man Eradicator squad to add some anti-tank, 2 Inceptor squads, 1 with bolters and 1 with plasma in order to add utility, a Land Raider Redeemer to deliver that Fire Discipline Aggressor combo, alongside 3 Scout squads to score some delicious victory points. Overall, very classic style of Gladius Task Force, including most of the powerful tools that Gladius Task Force gives the army access to, but also including that Black Templars flair with massive numbers of Sword Brethren to make use of Honor the Chapter and Assault Doctrine, alongside several captains and High Marshal Helbrecht to buff them up and add to their damage output. Now, returning back to the Bolton Wa momentarily, Mike Porter also went undefeated with a Space Marine chapter there as well. This one was Ultramarines, and this is a classic Vanguard Spearhead in the John Lennon style that we saw popularized at the World Championships of Warhammer. This included an Apothecary Biologus with the Blade Driven Deep to give his unit infiltration, alongside Marnius Calgar, who could both attach into an Aggressor squad to give an enormous brick of relatively fast, hard-hitting infantry that could start up in the middle of the table and put tons of pressure on the opponent from the get-go. We then had Uriel Ventress to give a unit Deep Strike, most likely the Centurion Devastator squad, which was also in the list, 6 models strong, equipped with twin las cannons, a unit of Company Heroes for Uriel Ventress to join into, 2 Eradicator squads to add some additional flexible anti-tank, 3 Inceptor squads, 2 of 6 with plasma, and 1 of 3 with assault bolters to act as utility, alongside 3 Scout squads and a Calidus Assassin to allow the list to score points more consistently. Now, speaking of consistent point scoring, let's return to the Sportsball GT and talk about Sebastian Gerhardt's Aeldari. This is a relatively standard build of Aeldari. It includes all our favorite units: an Outdark Wayleaper with the Phoenix Gem, a Farseer, Fuegan the Fire Lord, alongside a Spirit Seer with Fate's Messenger and the Incarn. That Spirit Seer would attach into a huge brick of 10 Wraithguard, and that would be supported by 3 Night Spinners to slow enemy units and allow the Incarn to teleport around the table from an early stage, 1 unit of Rangers, 1 unit of Swooping Hawks, and 1 unit of Warp Spiders to add utility, alongside a Bright Lance Warwalker as well. Pretty normal Aeldari stuff, so we can jump off that one fairly quickly and move over to the new kids on the block, Necrons. Necrons took down the Fun and Games GT with Caleb Wagner taking Hypercrypt Legion to an undefeated result. Hypercrypt Legion, obviously, just off the back of taking down LVO with Matt Laura's historic win last week, is definitely looking strong, and this is a pretty interesting archetype of it, focusing very heavily on super duper powerful anti-tank guns. It included a Catan Shard of the Nightbringer, but no other Catan Shards in the list, alongside a Chronomancer to attach into a unit of 10 Immortals, a Hexmark Destroyer with Dimensional Overseer to allow the army to hyperphase an additional unit, a Locust Lord with a Risen Tyrant to give his unit hit rerolls when they arrive out of reserve. That Locust Lord would then attach into a unit of 3 Locust Heavy Destroyers. Although the list doesn't say what they were equipped with, the Enminic Exterminators is actually a really interesting inclusion with the Arisen Tyrant combo. The list already has a lot of anti-tank shooting elsewhere, and the Enminic Exterminators shoot a massive number of attacks with sustained hits and expanded criticals thanks to the attached Locust Lord, allowing the unit with Arisen Tyrant to fish for those sustains and do absolutely massive damage to light or medium infantry. We then saw a Royal Warden, probably also to attach into the Immortal Squad to shore up Necron's typical problem with being caught in melee. Once that Immortal Squad commits to the fight and gets engaged in melee, it kind of doesn't do anything for the rest of the game. It has to fall back, it can't really fall back and operate normally, but the Royal Warden helps that out a little bit, allowing the unit to fall back and shoot, and then potentially trigger their Chronomancer movement to get even farther away from their enemy. We then saw a bunch of utility, a unit of 5 Deathmarks, a unit of 5 Flayed Ones, and 2 units of 3 Tomb Blades as well, alongside a Canoptech Spider and a Monolith, as well as 2 Doomsday Arcs. The big benefit of Hypercrypt Legion, allowing you to teleport your units into strategic reserve, allows you to reposition that Monolith as we saw at Las Vegas Open. I published several videos about Matt Laura's list and his win last week if you want to go check those out, but what Caleb's using here is the ability of the detachment to reposition large anti-tank weapons like Doomsday Arcs. The big downside of Doomsday Arcs is their physically massive model alongside relatively ponderous movement. It's oftentimes easy to hide from them since they are very difficult to maneuver around the battlefield. Fortunately, the Hypercrypt Legion can simply put them in strategic reserve and bring them off a table edge, or even Cosmic Precision them anywhere they want off the table every single turn, making it functionally impossible to hide from these enormous 4 damage guns. Once the Doomsday Arcs are in position, the Monolith can draw a lot of enemy fire, and the Doomsday Arcs can start remaining stationary to hit on 2s and gain their devastating wounds effect, which means that their guns absolutely rip apart the enemy army. I love the inclusion of Doomsday Arcs in a Hypercrypt Legion list. I've been playing it personally myself for a little bit, and I think it's super duper strong. And that moves us on to the Factorum GT, where George Crabtree went undefeated with Orks. This list included an absolute smorgasbord of characters, including Captain Badrick, Mazrog Scragbad, and 4 war bosses, 2 in Mega Armor, 1 on a war bike with Super Cyborg Body, as well as a Follow Me Lads war boss and Zodgrod Wartsnabga. These characters attached into a bunch of infantry, including a big Flash Gits unit, 2 units of 5 Mega Knobs, 1 unit of Standard Knobs, as well as a unit of 3 War Bikers. We then had that supported by 2 Stormboys units and 3 Gretchen squads to add a little bit of utility. Those infantry squads would then embark into one of the 4 trucks. One of those Gretchen squads was a 20 model unit to attach with Zodgrod Wartsnaga, who gives them a bevy of improvements, including a large scout move, which can potentially allow you to dominate midboard objectives with tons of high OC infantry from an early point of the game, and after the first turn of the game, attempt to generate CP from them. Other than those interesting inclusions, this is a relatively standard build of truck-focused Orks, although not necessarily the same volume of transports that we often see from Orks, but it still has a lot of super hard-hitting units with those Mega Knobs, and relatively fast Knob Squad with Follow Me Lads, and the War Boss-led Warbiker team. Now moving on from that, and going back to the Dark Sphere January GT, we also saw one other undefeated list from that, Ranchin Lee going undefeated with Death Guard. This list was extremely Plague Marine focused, including 3 Biologus Putrefires and 1 Foul Blightspawn, to attach it to the 5 units of Plague Marines, 4 of them with only 5 models and 1 of them with 10. Oftentimes we'll see the Biologus Putrefires spread out into the smaller units to make use of their multiple grenades abilities, and the Foul Blightspawn attached into the larger unit to make it an absolute combat powerhouse, with fights first, meaning that it can disembark from a transport, lay down some pain, and then even if your opponent comes to charge back into it, it's going to be able to swing first and clobber whatever's trying to kill it. We then had 3 Death Guard Rhinos to embark those 30 Plague Marines, 1 unit of Death Guard Cultists, 3 Plague Burst Crawlers, and the requisite 3 War Dog Brigands alongside 2 Nurglings. It's always interesting to see the focus of Death Guard lists be vehicles versus infantry. This one definitely kind of threads the needle, bringing lots of vehicles, including including the Plague Scrawlers and the Brigands, but also taking tons of Plague Marines. Fairly standard stuff from the Death Guard, and that moves us on to the Las Vegas Open GT, which was taken down by Chris Irvine and his Leagues of Votann. Chris was playing 2 Einherjar champions as well as a Khal with Grim Demeanor. We then had 2 units of Hearthkin Warriors that could split up amongst the list's 5 Sagitors. Whichever Sagitors weren't including Hearthkin Warriors would then be filled with Chthonian Berserks, because the army includes 3 units of 5 of them as well. This is a very scout-themed list, and following up those 5 Sagitors, we also had a grand total of 15 Hernkin Pioneers, 2 units of 6 and a unit of 3 as well, alongside an Einherjar Hearthguard unit to deep strike in the space created by the massive number of scouting units. These armies are absolutely lethal going first. They're able to pin you in your deployment zone by ridiculously fast-moving Hernkin Pioneers, and those Pioneers are able to jump into reserve and pop off table edges when you need them to in the late game in order to continuously score secondaries. If you're not able to clear out the move-blocking Bikers as well as the massive number of very efficient Sagitors quickly enough, the list will outscore you, and even if you can, it's oftentimes hard to kill the Sagitors and the units inside before the larger melee bricks like the Chthonian Berserks and the Hearthguard get to grips with you and absolutely tear you apart. And with that, those are all of the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Let me know down in the comment section which one was your favorite. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video, and thanks to everybody who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers, as well as the Cascade Clash for sponsoring this video. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.